This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about what happens when a system built on delay suddenly loses time. For decades, American power relied on an assumption so quiet we stopped noticing it. That institutions could absorb defiance, that rules could be bent without snapping. That process, slow and procedural, would always be enough. Tonight, that assumption breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, but formally. Somewhere inside the machinery of government, a line was crossed that cannot be uncrossed. Not by outrage, not by protest, but by paperwork, by procedure, by a clock that has started moving faster than politics can keep up. You won't hear it described this way on cable news. You'll hear names, you'll hear noise, you'll miss the mechanism. Stay with me, subscribe if you haven't already. Because once you see what actually shifted here, you can't unsee it. And the danger isn't what just happened. It's what happens next. What actually controls this system is not elections. It's not personalities. It's not even ideology. It's time. For years, power learned a trick. If you can slow things down long enough, the system exhausts itself. Investigations stretch. Appeals pile up. Public attention drifts. Accountability fades into background noise. Delay becomes a shield. That's how modern political survival works. Not by winning arguments, by outlasting them. But there is one institution that does not operate on political time. Courts run on procedural time. Deadlines, orders, compliance. And when those are ignored, the system doesn't debate. It escalates quietly. What matters here is not who is being scrutinized. It's who is no longer allowed to stall. A mechanism designed to absorb defiance has shifted into enforcement mode. And once that happens, personalities stop mattering because clocks don't care who you are. And the moment time becomes the controlling force again, everything downstream starts to accelerate. That acceleration is already visible. But the most dangerous part hasn't revealed itself yet. What makes this moment dangerous is not how fast it's moving, it's how long it took to get here. This didn't begin suddenly. It began slowly, quietly, legally. There was a time when defying institutions carried immediate cost. Orders were followed, warnings mattered, consequences arrived close to the action, the system corrected itself early. That is no longer true. Over time, something subtle changed. Noncompliance stopped being treated as a breach and started being treated as noise. Warnings multiplied. Deadlines slipped. Violations accumulated without closure. Each delay taught the same lesson. Nothing really happens. And that lesson spread. What used to trigger enforcement became normalized. What used to shock became expected. The system adapted by lowering its expectations instead of raising its response. That is how slow failure works. Not through collapse, but through tolerance. Until tolerance runs out, because normalization doesn't remove limits. It just hides them. And when those limits finally reassert themselves, they don't return gently. They return all at once. That's the shift most people missed. And it's why what's unfolding now doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a release. The moment it surfaced, it looked like a crisis. A formal action, filed, time-stamped, logged into the system like any other document, 47 pages, dense, procedural, boring at first glance. That's why it was misunderstood. Because this wasn't an emotional response. It wasn't political theater. It wasn't outrage spilling over. It was something colder than that, a signal that the normal corrective loop had failed. Contained inside that filing was not just evidence of violations, but a conclusion the system almost never reaches. That internal enforcement was no longer sufficient, that repeated warnings no longer worked, that escalation was no longer optional. This wasn't punishment. It was containment. And that distinction matters. Because once a system stops trying to correct behavior and starts trying to prevent damage, the rules change. Timelines compress, options narrow, authority moves upward, not outward. If you're watching this like a headline, you miss it. If you're watching it like a symptom, you start to understand This wasn't the story breaking. This was the system admitting it was out of time. And once that admission is made, nothing stays isolated. Here is how the system actually works when it reaches this stage. Responsibility doesn't disappear. It redistributes. When repeated defiance meets documented evidence, enforcement stops being reactive and becomes structural. One institution hands the problem to another, not for debate, but for absorption. Damage is rerouted upward so it doesn't spread outward. That transfer is the mechanism. Courts are designed to correct behavior. Legislatures are designed to contain risk. When correction fails, containment activates. And containment is not subtle. It doesn't ask for compliance. It assumes the absence of it. This is where incentives flip. Those who benefited from delay lose leverage. Those who absorbed the cost of instability, staff, witnesses, institutions, stop carrying the weight. The burden moves to the system itself. And once that happens, neutrality is no longer an option. What looks like sudden momentum is actually accumulated pressure being released through a narrow channel. Evidence becomes currency. Procedure becomes acceleration. Silence becomes exposure. No one inside this process is debating feelings. They're counting steps, calendars, thresholds. Because once containment begins, the question is no longer whether damage occurred. It's how much more can be allowed. And that answer is never generous. Then everything speeds up. Statements harden, positions lock. Security appears where it wasn't supposed to be. What used to be theoretical becomes operational. Barriers, planning calls, contingencies, not because something has happened yet, but because it might. This is how systems signal danger to themselves. When institutions stop assuming compliance, they start preparing for impact. They don't announce it. They don't dramatize it. They adjust posture. Quietly, timelines collapse. Decisions that once took weeks are suddenly measured in hours. Silence becomes coordination. Absence becomes intention. And here's the part most people misunderstand. Escalation doesn't mean chaos has arrived. It means the system expects chaos if it doesn't move first. That expectation changes behavior everywhere. Inside offices, inside caucuses, inside security briefings. People stop asking what's politically safe and start asking what's structurally necessary. That's when events stop being managed and start being contained. And once containment replaces management, there is no reset button, only the next breach. Here's where this stops being abstract. Because while institutions shift posture, you feel the drag. You feel it when stability turns brittle. When the rules that used to fade into the background suddenly start shaping daily life. When the language of procedure becomes the language of risk. You're not watching this as a participant in a power struggle. You're watching it as someone who depends on the system working quietly enough that you don't have to think about it. That's what's changing. When containment activates, uncertainty spreads outward. Markets hesitate. Workplaces brace. Communities tense. Not because they know what will happen, but because they know something can. This is where exhaustion sets in, where people stop arguing and start disengaging. And disengagement is not neutrality, it's vulnerability. If you feel that pressure, you're not imagining it. That's what systemic stress feels like before it's named. Stay with me, share this if you haven't, because what happens next isn't just decided by officials in rooms. It's shaped by how many people are still paying attention. And attention, right now, is a form of stability. This doesn't stay contained inside borders. When a system as central as the American state shifts into emergency posture, it sends a signal outward. Allies notice the change in tone before they hear the explanation. Markets read posture faster than statements. Adversaries don't need confirmation. They watch behavior. And behavior has shifted. Diplomatic language tightens. Security coordination increases. Assumptions that once held about continuity, predictability, restraint are quietly reevaluated, not announced, adjusted. This is how instability travels, not through headlines, but through recalculation. What was once a domestic process starts to ripple outward. Confidence thins, risk premiums rise, Strategic patience shortens. The system that once projected steadiness now projects motion. And motion invites testing, not necessarily confrontation, probing, pressure, waiting to see whether containment holds or fractures. This is the moment where internal stress becomes external vulnerability, where the question stops being what will happen here and becomes who else will move because of it. That's the part no one can fully model. Because once multiple systems start reacting at once, control becomes relative. And uncertainty stops being local. From here, the system has three possible directions. The first is adjustment. Institutions absorb the shock. Procedures harden. Boundaries are reasserted. The system bends without breaking. Stability returns, but tighter, less forgiving than before. Functional, but changed. The second is erosion. Processes continue, but confidence leaks out. Enforcement becomes selective. Norms weaken unevenly. Nothing collapses outright, but everything works a little less well. Fatigue replaces outrage. Drift replaces correction. And then there is rupture. That path doesn't arrive all at once, it accelerates. Pressure meets resistance. Containment fails somewhere unexpected. A miscalculation, a refusal, a spark landing on accumulated stress. What matters is that none of these paths are chosen in a single vote or decision. They emerge from momentum, from reaction layered on reaction, from how many institutions hold and which ones flinch. Right now, all three futures are still live. That's what makes this moment unstable. Because once acceleration overtakes intention, outcomes stop being planned. They start being inherited. There is a temptation at moments like this to look for resolution, a vote, a verdict, a headline that tells you it's over. That instinct is understandable. It's also dangerous because systems don't fail or recover on schedule. They reveal themselves. And what has been revealed here is not just a conflict, but a limit, a point where delay stopped working, where tolerance expired, where procedure became enforcement. Nothing about that resets easily. What happens next will not feel like drama. It will feel like administration, meetings, filings, security plans, quiet decisions that don't trend, but matter more than anything that does. If you're still watching, it's because you sense that something structural has shifted, and that looking away now would mean missing the moment it becomes permanent. Don't look away. Follow this thread, share it, stay engaged. Because the next phase of this story isn't about who wins. It's about what kind of system survives. And once that answer becomes clear, it won't be reversible.